The lights are merciless, white hot, unblinking. They pour over a stage where two men sit opposite each other, framed by the electric tension of an audience that's already chosen sides. Cameras swing like hunting hawks, their lenses waiting to capture the next viral moment. Charlie Kirk leans in first, shoulders forward, jaw set, the sharp confidence of a man who's built his empire on having the last word. His voice slices through the air, polished and practiced. Every syllable lands like a punchline. The crowd laughs, cheers, roars approval. Across from him, Jonathan Roumie doesn't move. His stillness is almost defiant, unsettling even. He listens, eyes soft, hands resting on the table as if steadying himself against the noise. Kirk presses harder, voice rising, feeding off the crowd. His words echo with the rhythm of certainty, that modern cadence of someone who's learned that applause is power. Then, something shifts. Roumie tilts his head, almost imperceptibly. A breath leaves him, long and measured. He doesn't reach for the microphone. He doesn't argue back. Instead, he closes his eyes. At first, no one understands. A few in the audience chuckle, assuming this is hesitation or nerves. The pause stretches. Then Roumie's lips begin to move. The words are low, reverent like a quiet current beneath the surface chaos. A prayer. The sound system captures it all, the cadence trembling with sincerity, cutting through the oxygen of the room. For a moment, the crowd doesn't know how to react. The applause falters. The laughter dies. Even Kirk's grin fades, confusion breaking through composure. Every camera in the hall zooms closer. The hum of the lights feels louder. People shift in their seats, phones hovering in midair. The silence spreads like a slow wave, consuming everything in its path. Somewhere in the back, a single cough echoes, awkward and lonely. Kirk blinks, frozen between instinct and etiquette. He can't interrupt. He can't roll his eyes. He can't turn this moment into a meme. He's trapped in the quiet, and Roumie's voice, humble and unwavering, fills the void he cannot control. And just like that, the crowd is no longer watching a debate. They're witnessing something else entirely. No one in the room, not even Kirk, was ready for what happened next. The night hadn't begun with silence. It began with noise. The kind that hums beneath the skin and turns a hall into a battlefield before the first word is spoken. It was a university auditorium, but it felt like a coliseum. Students in red caps and denim jackets clustered near the front rows, already rehearsing their applause. Others, quieter but just as ready, held their phones at the edges of their laps, waiting to capture whatever headline moment might erupt. The banners behind the stage read, "Faith and freedom, can belief unite a divided nation?" But no one in that room came seeking unity. They came for a show. Charlie Kirk was the perfect headliner. He arrived with the posture of a man used to the spotlight, confident and deliberate. His words were crisp, calculated to pierce through ideology like a spear. He thrived on reaction. Every smirk, every challenge, every scoff was currency. His brand of faith wasn't whispered in prayer. It was shouted from podiums and podcast mics. To his supporters, he embodied courage. To his critics, arrogance. But to Charlie, both were proof that he was being heard. Jonathan Roumie entered with a different kind of energy. No entourage, no theatrics, just calm. His presence felt more like an exhale. Where Kirk's charisma was an explosion, Roumie's was a quiet gravity. He didn't have to demand attention. It arrived on its own. Many recognized him from The Chosen, the face of Jesus in a world addicted to cynicism. But here, without script or camera, his authenticity was unfiltered. He wasn't there to win. He was there to witness. That difference, subtle yet seismic, defined the night before a single question was asked. Kirk represented a faith of fire, sharp-edged and defiant, forged in culture wars. Roumie carried a faith of water, slow, steady, refusing to take shape except in truth. When these two met, it wasn't debate versus debate. It was two visions of belief colliding under the unforgiving glare of social media's judgment. The moderator's voice cracked the tension. "Gentlemen, the question is simple. Has faith become a political weapon in America?" Simple, maybe, but loaded like a gun. Kirk leaned forward immediately, seizing the moment. His words came fast, layered with statistics, slogans, applause lines honed by repetition. The audience responded like a trained chorus. Cheers at the right beats, laughter at the right barbs. Roumie waited. He let the sound crest and fall before speaking. His first words were quiet enough that the microphones had to lean in. Faith, he said slowly, was never meant to be weaponized. It's meant to be lived. The crowd shifted, some intrigued, others irritated by his restraint. Kirk smiled the way a boxer smiles at a patient opponent. He was there to win rounds, not moments. Yet somewhere in the crowd, even among his supporters, a few heads tilted. There was something disarming about Roumie's calm, like he was drawing oxygen out of the room's aggression. As the evening unfolded, the pattern solidified. Kirk's arguments struck like lightning, bright, loud, gone in a flash. Roumie's responses lingered like thunder, slower but deeper, echoing long after he stopped speaking. Every clash between them became a metaphor for something larger. America's struggle between noise and meaning, dominance and grace, ego and empathy. And while no one could have predicted how it would end, the divide was already clear. One came to win, the other came to witness. But to see why this prayer landed like thunder, we need to understand who these men really are. Charlie Kirk had built an empire on words, fast ones, sharp ones, words that cut through hesitation and carved certainty out of chaos. He wasn't born into power. He built it one microphone at a time, one viral clip at a time, until his voice became an anthem for those who feared being silenced. In his world, doubt was weakness, hesitation a kind of death. The brand he wore like armor was conviction, gleaming, immovable, unbreakable. He'd been 19 when he first stood in front of a camera and discovered the charge that came from being listened to. The setting was humble. A borrowed microphone, a college hallway that smelled faintly of floor wax and adrenaline. He'd spoken about freedom, about responsibility, about how young people were losing their moral compass. Someone uploaded it to YouTube. The next morning, it had thousands of views. That was the first time Charlie learned what attention felt like when it wrapped around your name. It wasn't just approval, it was validation. And soon, it became addiction. By his mid-20s, he was no longer speaking, he was commanding. Auditoriums filled, cameras clicked, donors smiled. He'd mastered the rhythm of outrage, start calm, rise fast, punch hard, finish smug. He knew how to bait an audience into laughter and then trap them in applause. Faith, for Charlie, became less a sanctuary and more a sword. He wore religion like a uniform, crisp and public, its edges sharp enough to defend and attack in the same breath. When challenged, he didn't pray, he performed. But performance, no matter how perfected, leaves cracks. Backstage, between events, he'd sometimes catch his reflection in a green room mirror and hesitate. The lights always felt too bright, his smile too tight. He'd tell himself it was fatigue, the price of influence. But deep down, there was something else, an ache he couldn't name. A restlessness that came from fighting every battle as though it were his last. He would scroll through his own clips late at night, watching himself dismantle professors and humiliate opponents. The comments were intoxicating. Savage! Owned. Legend. But buried beneath them were a few quiet words he could never unsee. Does he ever listen? Why does he sound so angry? He'd close the app, pretend it didn't sting, and remind himself that empathy didn't trend. There was one moment that haunted him more than he admitted. A live event years earlier, when a young woman had stood up from the crowd and asked him, voice trembling, if his faith made room for people who'd been broken by the church. The room had gone quiet. Cameras aimed. He remembered the heat in his chest, the demand for a clean, decisive answer. Instead of compassion, he'd given her rhetoric. He'd seen her face fall before the applause drowned it out. That night, alone in the hotel, he couldn't shake the image of her walking away. Still, the next morning, he put on the suit, the grin, the confidence. because Charlie Kirk wasn't just a man anymore. He was a movement, and movements can't doubt. Movements can't pause. He told himself he carried faith into the battlefield of culture. But in truth, faith had become his battlefield. Each debate was war, every opponent an enemy to be crushed, every silence a void that needed to be filled before someone else's truth crept in. By the time he walked onto the university stage to face Jonathan Roumie, the machine around him was well oiled. His team rehearsed talking points, clipped his mic just right, checked lighting angles for maximum sharpness. The crowd was his fuel, and he could already feel their energy buzzing like static. He smiled, knowing his fans expected dominance. That was his gift, control. He could make anyone lose composure. Anyone but himself. And yet, as the lights came up, and he caught sight of Roumie's calm demeanor, something subtle flickered inside him. Irritation, maybe, or envy. The actor's stillness wasn't weakness, it was presence. It was the kind of peace Charlie hadn't felt in years, and it unsettled him more than any argument could. He masked it with a smirk, sharpened his tone, doubled down on confidence. But deep beneath the surface, the cracks began to widen. Because for all his mastery of rhetoric, Charlie Kirk's greatest fear wasn't being wrong. It was being unheard. Silence was his only true opponent, and silence was undefeated. And on the other side of the stage stood a man who lived the opposite truth. Jonathan Roumie had never planned to become a symbol. Symbols are constructed, polished, and projected. He was simply a man who believed that storytelling could heal. But the world had other plans. Long before the cameras of The Chosen turned him into the face of faith for millions, Roumie was just another working actor in Los Angeles, hustling between auditions, clutching hope in one hand and rent overdue notices in the other. He'd walk the cracked sidewalks of Burbank, praying under his breath, not for fame, but for purpose. His faith wasn't loud, it was lived. Every no from a casting director became a meditation on patience. Every small role, the nameless waiter, the background soldier, was a reminder that humility was training, not punishment. When friends in the industry told him to toughen up, to be more strategic, he'd smile softly and say, "If the story's meant for me, it'll find me." They laughed, but he meant it. There were nights when the silence in his apartment pressed down like a weight. No calls, no scripts, no sense of momentum. He'd stare at the cracked ceiling, feeling both invisible and oddly seen, as if the same God who gave him hunger was also teaching him restraint. He learned to live with uncertainty as his roommate, with prayer as his only steady income. Then came The Chosen. The audition was small, unassuming. He hadn't expected much. He went in with no grand performance, no effort to impress. He just read the lines, simple, compassionate, grounded. When he walked out, he felt peace. Weeks later, when the call came, he knelt on the floor and cried. Not for opportunity, but for the responsibility. He knew the weight of portraying Christ wasn't about acting, it was about surrender. As the series grew, so did its impact. Millions found comfort in his portrayal, not because it was perfect, but because it was human. Roumie's Jesus laughed, wept, paused before speaking. He was real. And in those pauses, audiences rediscovered something they hadn't seen in years: faith without spectacle. Fame arrived like a flood, but Roumie treated it like rain. Something to be received, not owned. He refused to monetize prayer or posture for headlines. When interviewers tried to bait him into culture wars, he deflected with grace. "I'm not here to argue," he'd say. "I'm here to remind." Still, even humility comes with tests. As his influence grew, so did the noise around him. Commentators dissecting his every word, political figures trying to co-opt his image, fans turning reverence into idolatry. He stayed grounded the only way he knew how. He prayed. Before every appearance, before every shoot, before every encounter with the world's expectations, he whispered the same line under his breath: "Let it be yours, not mine." He wasn't Narvi. He knew the stage he stood on came with scrutiny. He also knew that faith, when displayed publicly, became vulnerable to distortion. But Roumie's conviction ran deeper than reputation. To him, the point of prayer was not persuasion, it was alignment. It was a quiet declaration that ego has no seat at the table of grace. Behind the calm exterior, though there was steel, those who mistook his gentleness for weakness misunderstood him entirely. Roumie's strength was forged in years of rejection, in learning to find identity without applause. His was a discipline carved by solitude, the kind that doesn't seek validation because it already knows its worth. While others preached from pulpits of pride, he lived his sermon in small acts, listening, forgiving, showing up. In his private journals, Roumie often wrote about the danger of noise, how modern faith had become too eager to perform holiness instead of living it. The louder we shout about God, he once penned, the less we hear him. He believed stillness wasn't passivity, it was power in its purest form. That belief would be tested the night he faced Charlie Kirk. When the invitation came, he hesitated. He knew Kirk's reputation, quick with his words, fierce in debate, adored for his takedowns. It wasn't hostility that made Roumie pause, it was the risk of the moment being twisted into spectacle. But after prayer, he agreed. Not because he wanted to win, but because he sensed that someone, somewhere, needed to see faith presented differently, not as dominance, but as devotion. In the days leading up to the debate, his team rehearsed logistics, lighting cues, stage blocking, talking points. Roumie, meanwhile, prepared differently. He fasted from media, spent his evenings in quiet reflection, and asked friends to pray not for victory, but for clarity. When he arrived at the university, he didn't carry a binder of notes or statistics. He carried a small rosary, tucked discreetly into his jacket pocket. To him, that was enough. Backstage, he could hear the crowd through the curtains. Laughter, shouts, anticipation. The kind of energy that thrives on confrontation. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Let me be a vessel." When his cue came, he stepped onto the stage, greeted with polite applause and curious glances. Across from him sat Kirk, eyes sharp, smile confident. Roumie nodded, offering a warmth that momentarily softened even his opponent's expression. To the audience, it looked like two men about to debate. But Roumie knew this wasn't about argument. It was about presence. He didn't come to defend faith. He came to embody it. The living, breathing reminder that stillness can hold its own against noise. And soon, he would remind even his fiercest critic what reverence feels like. When their worlds finally collided on that stage, even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The stage pulsed with energy, the kind that only exists when conviction collides with ego. The moderator had barely finished the next question before Charlie Kirk seized the microphone, voice booming through the hall like a command. Faith, he declared, has become soft. It's been hijacked by emotion, by actors who think sentiment can save society. What we need isn't prayer circles, it's strength. The crowd erupted. Applause, laughter, a few shouts of agreement. Kirk basked in it, shoulders squared, eyes gleaming beneath the glare of the lights. Jonathan Roumie didn't move. He watched, not with judgment, but with a strange sadness, like someone witnessing a friend lost in his own noise. Kirk continued, faster now, rhythm picking up like a machine hitting full speed. If you're not willing to defend your beliefs in the public arena, you don't belong in it. Faith without action is just performance. He turned slightly, eyes locking on Roumie with that practiced mixture of challenge and charm. So tell me, Jonathan, where's your action? What does praying on set really do for a broken country? The jab landed. The audience reacted the way crowds always do when provoked. A ripple of tension followed by scattered applause. Roumie leaned forward slightly, his fingers interlaced, calm as if holding the weight of the question rather than the insult. He spoke softly, the kind of softness that forces a room to lean in. Action without grace, he said, is just noise. For a moment, the silence cracked the rhythm of the night. Kirk chuckled, dismissive, waving a hand as if swatting a fly. That's poetic, Sure, but the world doesn't change with poetry. It changes when people stand up, when they fight back. That's what I do. Roumie nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in something between a smile and a sigh. Fighting back can be holy, he said, but only when you remember what you're fighting for. The line hung in the air like a thread of light. Some in the crowd shifted, unsure whether to clap or stay still. Kirk noticed it, the flicker of uncertainty, and pounced. That's the problem, isn't it? Your kind of faith makes people passive. We're supposed to be soldiers for truth, not spectators. Roumie's gaze never hardened. A soldier serves, he replied quietly. He doesn't dominate. Kirk opened his mouth, ready with another counter, but for the first time that night, the timing faltered. He wasn't used to debating someone who didn't play by the rules of combat. His rhythm depended on resistance, tension, conflict, sparks. But Roumie gave him none of it, just stillness. The audience, sensing the shift, grew restless. Phones hovered again. Some looked thrilled, waiting for the next takedown. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure why their excitement had curdled into unease. A student whispered to a friend, "Is he going to fight back?" Another replied, "I think he already is." Kirk, unwilling to lose control, leaned harder. "So you think silence is strength?" he said, laughter edging his words. "You think closing your eyes and hoping for peace will change anything?" Roumie's expression softened further, and for the first time, his sadness was visible. Not pity, sorrow. "I don't hope for peace," he said. "I invite it." Something in the tone unsettled even the most loyal of Kirk's supporters. The contrast between their energies had become undeniable. Kirk's clipped, restless cadence versus Roumie's unhurried depth. The moderator glanced nervously at the clock, sensing both the danger and the magic of what was unfolding. Kirk tried again, faster, sharper. "You're dodging! Tell this audience what faith means when the world's burning." "Tell them what prayer fixes?" Roumie paused. He looked out over the sea of faces, some tense, some curious, some moved without knowing why. The lights hit his features in soft gold. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "prayer doesn't fix the world. It fixes us so we can face the world without hate." The room fell still. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Kirk blinked, searching for a comeback, but none came. The noise that had filled the auditorium only minutes earlier now collapsed into quiet confusion. It wasn't defeat, it was dissonance. The crowd didn't know who to root for anymore. Somewhere in the back row, a student whispered, "Why does it feel different now?" No one answered. Kirk shifted in his chair, breaking eye contact for the first time. Roumie exhaled, his gaze soft but unyielding, the embodiment of peace under pressure. The tension wasn't gone. It had simply changed form. What had begun as a duel of words had turned into something deeper, something neither man fully understood yet. But instead of fighting, Roumie did something no one saw coming. Charlie Kirk leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrow with the precision of a marksman preparing for the kill shot. He could feel the crowd's energy pulsing through the floorboards. That collective hunger for conflict, the electric charge of anticipation. His words had sliced through the debate like blades all night, and now, sensing the end, he went for the finale. "Jonathan," he said, voice smooth but sharp, "it's easy to talk about love and prayer when you're an actor playing Jesus, but real faith, real courage, is standing up and fighting for what's right, even when it's unpopular. So tell us." He paused for effect, scanning the room as if every eye belonged to him. "What does your kind of prayer do for a broken, divided country? Does it fix anything? Or just make you feel good about yourself?" The crowd reacted in waves, gasps, laughter, claps. Someone shouted, "Good question." Another murmured, "Oof, he got him." Kirk leaned back, satisfied. He'd done this 100 times before. Corner the opponent, own the moment, feed the headline machine. But Roumie didn't answer. Not right away. He didn't flinch, didn't fire back, didn't even reach for his mic. He just closed his eyes. At first it seemed like hesitation, a stall, a weakness. But then his hands came together, his head bowed, and the auditorium so loud seconds ago began to shift. The sound of his voice rose slowly, steady, tender, deliberate. Father. The first word alone fractured the room. It wasn't rehearsed or rhetorical. It carried weight, intimacy, the kind of tone that didn't belong on a debate stage, but in a chapel, in a hospital room, in a moment between despair and hope. We thank you for bringing us here tonight, he continued, eyes still closed. Not to win, not to humiliate, but to remember that before we speak, we must listen. Before we argue, we must love, and before we fight, we must pray. A whisper moved through the crowd. The moderator looked stunned, frozen between professionalism and awe. The tech crew in the back glanced at each other, unsure whether to mute him or turn up the mic. Kirk stared, his expression unreadable, confusion flickering behind his carefully controlled mask. Roumie went on, his words flowing like water smoothing over stone. We are all broken in some way, Lord, even those who speak with conviction, even those who hide their pain behind certainty. Bless my brother here beside me, he said, gesturing gently toward Kirk without looking at him, and bless every soul in this room, those who cheer, those who doubt, those who feel unseen. Phones lowered, fingers stopped scrolling, breath seemed to hold itself hostage. The room had become a living heartbeat, slow and synchronized, waiting for what came next. For a brief second, Roumie said, his voice barely above a whisper, let us remember that you are not in the noise. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but reverence. You are in the stillness. It was then that the silence fell completely, a silence so absolute it became its own sound. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the shuffle of someone's sleeve, the soft whir of a camera lens refocusing. Even Kirk didn't move. His fingers, which had been tapping against the table, stilled mid-motion. His breath slowed. Roumie opened his eyes. They glistened, not with performance, but with something unguarded. He looked out over the sea of faces. Some stunned, some tearful, some fighting back disbelief. Let us pray, he whispered. He bowed his head again, and this time, the audience followed. A few hesitated, unsure if they should participate, but something about the moment made choice irrelevant. Even those who didn't believe couldn't look away. Lord, he continued, teach us that righteousness without compassion is just pride. Teach us that conviction without mercy is just noise. Remind us that truth is not shouted, it's lived. Each sentence landed like a heartbeat. You could feel the crowd's tension melt, replaced by something softer, deeper, unspoken. Someone in the second row covered their mouth. Another pressed a hand to their chest. A camera operator, normally detached, mechanical, forgot to move the rig, transfixed. Kirk sat motionless. His jaw, once set firm, now slackened. The smirk was gone. For the first time all evening, he looked human, small, contemplative, maybe even humbled. The man who had mastered debate was now witnessing something debate couldn't touch. Roumie finished quietly. And when we leave this place, let our words be gentler than our opinions, and our hearts louder than our microphones. Amen. He lifted his head. The word hung in the air, trembling like glass. No one clapped. No one dared. The silence lingered, sacred and awkward and impossibly full. Roumie looked at Kirk, not in triumph, but in kinship. There was no gloating in his eyes, only compassion. And that compassion landed heavier than any punchline. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though time itself forgot to move. Then, finally, someone exhaled, a deep, shaky breath that rippled through the hall. A sound of surrender, of awe, of realization. The crowd, so accustomed to reaction, didn't know what to do. Some bowed their heads again, others blinked through tears. A few, desperate to reassert normalcy, lifted their phones, recording the moment that words could never truly capture. Kirk blinked, still stunned. His throat tightened as if to speak, but nothing came. Every instinct, to reclaim control, to pivot, to fill the void. He looked down at the table, then back up at Roumie, and for the first time he didn't see an opponent. He saw a mirror. Roumie nodded gently, as though blessing the stillness itself. And in that moment, the audience, left breathless between belief and disbelief, became witness to something beyond ideology. A single act of grace had dismantled the architecture of confrontation. In the hours that followed, the clip would explode across the internet. On social media, the reactions poured in. Did anyone else feel that? I'm not religious, but wow, that hit me. You could feel the spirit in that silence. Even Charlie looked shaken. The thumbnails, the headlines, the takes, they all tried to capture it, but none could. Because what happened that night wasn't strategy or spectacle. It was stillness weaponized into beauty. But the silence didn't end when the prayer did. That's when the real storm began. By sunrise, the moment had already escaped the auditorium and entered the bloodstream of the internet. The clip of Jonathan Roumie bowing his head mid-debate, the silence, the prayer, the visible unraveling of Charlie Kirk's composure, began spreading like digital wildfire. On TikTok, it looped endlessly under captions like, "This wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning." On YouTube, thumbnails screamed in bold white text, "Charlie Kirk's two Neds silent? Roumie's prayer stops the room?" Within hours, hashtags began to crystallize across platforms: Fat Pray Live, Fat Roumie Moment, Fat Faith Over Fury. Each word pulsed with its own electricity. Clips were dissected frame by frame. Commentators slowed the footage, analyzing Kirk's frozen expression, Roumie's gentle hand movement, the crowd's stunned faces. Some called it a spiritual mic drop. Others claimed it was performance disguised as piety. The split, like everything in modern America, became both mirror and battlefield. Cable panels rolled the footage in slow motion. A conservative pundit on one network called it emotional manipulation, shaking his head with forced amusement. "Faith is private," he said. Roumie turned it into theater. But a progressive pastor countered on another. Maybe that's the point. Maybe faith has been trapped behind podiums and pulpits too long. Maybe someone had to remind us what reverence feels like. The comments section was chaos and confession blended into one. I cried, and I don't even know why. That silence said more than his critics have in years. I used to roll my eyes at prayer. Not anymore. And buried among the cynicism and debate, one quiet post from a college student read, "I was in that room. You could feel something. Not politics, not performance. Something real." It was shared 200,000 times. Meme pages turned it into gospel. Edits paired the footage with cinematic scores. Slow strings, trembling piano. Others added captions like, "One calm defeats chaos," or "The loudest voice is sometimes silence." Even major influencers outside the faith world chimed in. One pop star tweeted, "Did y'all see that Roumie dude? I haven't felt peace like that in forever." The tweet racked up 1 million likes before sunrise. And yet, not everyone celebrated. Some saw danger in Roumie's serenity. Political strategists warned that emotion was the new weapon, that a prayer could move hearts faster than facts. One commentator sneered, "He didn't win a debate, he hijacked it." But that critique only fed the fire, because the numbers told their own story. In 24 hours, the clip reached 30 million views. By day 2, 80. By the end of the week, it was the most watched debate moment of the year. Roumie's calm expression had become an icon. Plastered on shirts, murals, digital art pieces captioned, "Stillness wins." Late-night hosts joked about it, but even in humor, there was reverence. One host quipped, "Charlie Kirk went in for a fight and got baptized instead." The audience laughed, but when the clip played again, that hush, that pause, the laughter faded into silence once more. The silence itself had gone viral. Churches replayed the clip during Sunday services. Youth groups shared it as a lesson in humility. And for a generation exhausted by shouting, the prayer became a symbol, not of religion, but of refuge. Meanwhile, in political corners, strategists scrambled to interpret it. Polling groups found a strange phenomenon. People who watched the clip reported feeling calmer, more connected, less angry, even across party lines. One analyst summed it up: Roumie didn't just pray, he interrupted the algorithm. And amid the wave of reactions, one thread emerged that no one expected: silence challenges ego. In a culture addicted to volume, Roumie's stillness had become rebellion. His pause felt like protest. His prayer felt like power reclaimed from chaos. Days later, Roumie finally broke his own silence. In a short post, no hashtags, no fanfare, he wrote, "I didn't pray to prove anything. I prayed because I felt we had all forgotten how." The post reached millions. Beneath it, one of the top comments reads simply, "You reminded us." Kirk, for his part, stayed quiet longer than anyone predicted. When he finally addressed it on his podcast, he tried to joke, to minimize. But his tone betrayed him, measured, uncertain. "It caught me off guard," he admitted. "I wasn't expecting that. Maybe I should have." It was the closest thing to humility he'd ever shown publicly. By then, the moment had transcended them both. It was no longer about ideology or who won. It was about what was felt. Clips of that hushed auditorium continued circulating, played in classrooms, sermons, even therapy sessions. One viral comment captured it perfectly. "It's not that Roumie silenced Kirk, it's that he silenced all of us long enough to hear ourselves again." And amid the noise, one message cut through clearer than ever. In the quiet days after the storm, Jonathan Roumie did something rare in the digital age. Nothing. No interviews. No victory lap. No response to the torrent of praise and commentary that swirled around his name. While pundits and partisans dissected the meaning of his prayer, Roumie retreated from the noise. Friends later said he spent those days walking, journaling, sitting beneath trees, answering messages only with gratitude emojis or short blessings. He wasn't avoiding the spotlight. He was honoring the silence that had made the moment sacred in the first place. When he finally spoke, it wasn't on television or a podcast. It was a simple video recorded on his phone. The lighting was soft, the tone unpolished. "Prayer isn't performance," he said quietly, looking directly into the lens. "It's presence. It's not about control. It's about surrender. That night, I didn't pray to prove anything. I prayed because I felt we'd all forgotten what listening sounds like." It wasn't a statement meant to go viral, but it did. Millions watched it, replayed it, shared it with captions like, "This is what humility looks like." The clip spread not because it was loud, but because it was calm, an antidote to the exhaustion people didn't even realize they carried. The cultural conversation began to shift. Commentators who'd initially mocked the prayer found themselves reflecting on why it unsettled them. Psychologists weighed in on how stillness could disarm defensiveness. Spiritual leaders from different faiths called it a modern parable of humility. What had started as a clash between a political firebrand and an actor of faith had become something far larger. A mirror held up to a restless nation. Charlie Kirk, in his own follow-up, spoke carefully, almost subdued. He acknowledged the unexpected power of that silence. "Maybe I've been fighting too loud," he admitted. It wasn't repentance, exactly, but it was recognition. And in that, Roumie's influence deepened. Because his prayer hadn't shamed anyone, it had stilled them. The deeper truth emerged not in analysis but in emotion. People began asking themselves, when was the last time I was truly quiet? When did conviction start feeling like combat? In Roumie's serenity, they saw what was missing from their own lives, the space between belief and noise, and slowly, the moment transformed from a headline into a lesson. Not about politics, not about winning, but about how easily we confuse volume for strength. Roumie's act had flipped the equation. The one who raised his voice lost control. The one who lowered his head reclaimed it. He became a symbol not of piety, but of perspective, proof that humility doesn't erase power, it reveals it. His prayer reminded millions that the deepest truths aren't shouted or argued, they're lived. One columnist wrote, Kirk argued, Roumie remembered. And in that remembering, we all rediscovered something sacred, the power of grace in a graceless world. The nation, for a fleeting moment, exhaled together. Across campuses and churches, cafes and comment threads, people began invoking Roumie's words, presence over performance, stillness over spectacle. They weren't slogans. They were reminders, gentle, grounding, and disarmingly human. The moral contrast that had framed their encounter became a reflection of every heart watching. Kirk embodied intellect without stillness, the endless need to be right, to fill silence before it revealed anything uncomfortable. Roumie embodied faith without ego, a trust that being right mattered less than being real. And so the viral moment that began as confrontation ended as communion. The prayer wasn't a victory, it was a mirror, a reminder that grace, once seen, cannot be unseen. Roumie's final message to his followers captured it best. You don't need a stage to be heard, you need stillness to be understood. The words resonated far beyond the screen, a whisper threading through a world addicted to noise. And yet, for millions who watched, one question lingered. Charlie Kirk froze when Jonathan Roumie began to pray. The line that had ricocheted across headlines, stitched through tweets, whispered in living rooms, now carried a different weight. Because it wasn't just about a man silenced by surprise. It was about a nation momentarily stunned into remembering something sacred, that power isn't always loud, and courage doesn't always roar. That silence wasn't defeat, it was awakening. For once, the clash didn't end in a soundbite or a scoreboard. It ended in reverence, a collective breath that reminded millions that faith, when stripped of ego, becomes something larger than argument. People didn't share the clip because it was dramatic. They shared it because it was true. Because for one fleeting instant, the noise stopped. And in that pause, we all heard something we'd been missing. So if this moment moved you, share it. Not to take sides, not to prove a point, but to remind the world that stillness still has power, that grace still changes hearts, that humility, in the face of pride, still wins without ever needing to conquer. Because one prayer, whispered in a room built for shouting, reached farther than 1,000 debates ever could. It showed that the bravest thing any of us can do is to stop speaking long enough to listen. The lights dim, the echoes fade, the moment lingers. Charlie Kirk froze when Jonathan Roumie began to pray. And maybe, just maybe, so did we.